On a freezing winter night, a weary single dad trudged home from his shift at the garage, thinking only of the little girl waiting for him under warm blankets. At a lonely bus stop, he noticed a woman shivering, her elegant dress no match for the biting wind. Without hesitation, he offered her the only coat he owned, a simple act of kindness born from a heart that had known both love and loss. What he didn't realize was that the stranger carried secrets far heavier than the cold, secrets that would soon upend his quiet life. This is a story of compassion that crosses boundaries, of hidden battles, and of how one man's small gesture opened the door to healing, second chances, and a love that defied time itself. The bus stop stood lonely at the edge of town, its flickering light barely pushing back the darkness of a bitter December night. Daniel Carter adjusted the strap of his tool bag, his breath rising in clouds as he made his way from the garage after another late shift. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion, his coat frayed at the seams but still heavy with warmth. He was used to nights like this, used to the cold, used to carrying burdens that never seemed to lighten. At 35, Daniel had already lived a lifetime of grief and sacrifice. His wife's death 5 years ago in a car accident had left him with a tiny infant in his arms and a heart carved hollow by loss. That infant was now an 8-year-old girl named Emily, the bright center of his dimly lit world. Every long day of work, every scraped knuckle, every dollar stretched thin was for her. She was asleep now, probably curled up with her stuffed bear, waiting for him to come home quietly and brush her hair from her face before bed. Daniel might have walked past the woman if not for the way she shivered. She stood under the weak light of the bus stop, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her thin dress offering no defense against the icy wind. Her shoes, elegant and delicate, looked misplaced on the cracked pavement. She seemed out of place entirely, like a figure torn from a glossy magazine and dropped into the gray corners of his world. She looked up as Daniel slowed, her eyes widening slightly, and he caught the sharp tremor in her breath. For a long second, he hesitated. He didn't have much to give, never had. But something inside him stirred, a memory. His late wife, soaked through on a stormy night years ago, laughing as he pulled his coat over her shoulders. That image seared into him with both tenderness and ache. Without allowing himself to think further, Daniel shrugged off his coat and stepped closer. "Here," he said simply, holding it out. The woman blinked, startled. "You'll freeze," she whispered, her voice smooth yet fragile, carrying the kind of refinement Daniel rarely heard at a bus stop. "I've had colder nights," he replied, draping the coat around her shoulders. She flinched at first, then clutched the fabric tightly, drawing it close as if holding on to more than just warmth. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment Daniel felt as though she were trying to say something without words. Gratitude, yes, but also something heavier. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "It's just a coat," he said, though he knew in his chest it was more. It was all he had, really his only barrier against the night, and yet he felt lighter without it. The bus arrived, its brakes squealing as it pulled to the curb. She stepped toward the door, then turned back to him. "Thank you," she said, her lips forming a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a shadow there, a hidden weight. Daniel noticed it but didn't press. She boarded, and in another instant she was gone, the bus carrying her away into the night. Daniel stood for a while, the cold gnawing at his bones, the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. Something about the encounter unsettled him. She hadn't been just another passerby. Her gaze, the way her hands had trembled, the sorrow in her expression, it all left him with questions he couldn't answer. He tightened his arms around himself and started the long walk home. When he arrived, the small house was dark, except for the soft glow of a nightlight in Emily's room. He crept in, watching her chest rise and fall as she dreamed. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and kissed her lightly. For her, he would endure anything: hunger, exhaustion, loneliness. He had vowed to never let her feel the coldness he carried inside since her mother's death. Yet tonight, as he lay in bed, Daniel couldn't shake the image of the woman clutching his coat. A stranger with eyes that mirrored his own grief, as though she too carried memories that refused to let her go. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But deep inside, Daniel felt he had stepped into something larger than himself, something waiting to unfold. The bell above the garage door jingled the following morning, and Daniel looked up from beneath the hood of an old Ford truck. He expected Mr. Harris from down the street or maybe one of the delivery guys. Instead, standing in the doorway, framed by the dusty light spilling in, was the woman from the bus stop. His coat, neatly folded, was tucked in her arms. For a moment, Daniel thought he was imagining her. She seemed out of place amid the grease-stained floor and shelves stacked with rusted tools. Emily, perched on her stool in the corner, looked up from her coloring book and grinned. "Daddy, who's that?" she asked, her voice full of mischief. The woman bent down with surprising ease, her polished heels tapping against the concrete. "I'm Clara," she said warmly. "And I think your dad fixed something of mine." She held out the coat, her eyes lingering on Daniel's face as though testing his reaction. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, trying not to reveal the odd mix of surprise and unease churning in his chest. She explained that her car had broken down nearby and she thought she'd stop in. Daniel's eyes flicked to the sleek sedan parked outside. The car was spotless, the kind of vehicle most people in this town had only seen in magazines. Something about her excuse didn't quite fit. Still, she lingered. And Emily, never one to let a guest feel unwelcome, tugged at Clara's hand and proudly showed her the crayon drawing she'd been working on. A stick figure family of two, holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Clara's face softened instantly, her lips parting as though she might say something, but didn't. For a fraction of a second, Daniel caught it, the flash of pain in her expression, the kind that didn't belong to someone who had everything. Over the next several days, Clara found excuses to return. Once it was a rattle in her engine, another time a strange noise she couldn't place. Each time, Daniel suspected she was exaggerating, but Emily didn't mind. She adored Clara, often asking if Miss Clara would come back soon. The woman listened to Emily chatter about her school projects and the stories of her mother, stories Emily clung to though she had been only 3 when she lost her. Clara's attention was genuine, her eyes glistening when Emily spoke of the bedtime songs her mother used to hum. Daniel noticed it. He noticed everything. One evening, as Daniel closed up the shop, Clara lingered by the door with 2 paper cups of coffee. They sat on the steps, the sky painted with streaks of violet and gray. Clara told him, hesitantly, that she had grown up bouncing between foster homes, always yearning for a family that never quite stayed. She had worked her way through college, into boardrooms, and finally to success that looked enviable from the outside, but left her emptier than ever. Daniel listened, struck by the vulnerability in her voice. It was a story that resonated with his own, a story of loss, of survival. In return, he shared his past, the accident that had taken his wife, the nights spent holding a crying baby in one arm while fixing engines with the other, the long road of learning to live with absence. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight. Clara reached across, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You've carried more than most men ever will," she whispered. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to feel the warmth of a connection flicker, yet shadows lingered. He had noticed her glance at her phone with clipped urgency, the commanding tone in her voice when she answered calls, the quiet authority that seeped through even in casual conversation. Then, one afternoon, while picking up a dropped scarf from her purse, his eyes caught a glimpse of a folded prescription slip. The words "chronic heart condition" flashed before him before Clara snatched it away, her face pale. She smiled quickly, too quickly. "Just routine," she said, changing the subject. Daniel didn't press, but the unease stayed with him. The final blow came at the diner a few days later. Daniel and Emily were eating pancakes when the TV above the counter switched to the business news. There, on the screen, was Clara poised, commanding every inch the corporate leader, as the anchor introduced her as Clara Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries. Daniel's fork slipped from his hand. Emily clapped her hands. "Daddy, that's Miss Clara," she squealed, but Daniel sat frozen, his heart pounding. When Clara appeared at the garage the next morning, Daniel confronted her. "You didn't tell me who you were," he said, voice sharp with hurt. Clara's eyes pleaded. "I wanted you to know me as a person, not a title." But Daniel's walls slammed shut. "You don't belong here, Clara. I can't let Emily get dragged into something that isn't real." His words were cold, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Clara stood there silently, the woman who had seemed untouchable now looking smaller, lonelier, and for the first time, Daniel turned away. The fallout came swiftly. Within days of the television broadcast, tabloids ran with headlines plastered across their covers. CEO caught with a small-town mechanic. Clara Whitmore's secret romance. Reporters loitered outside the garage, their cameras flashing at every customer who came and went. Some neighbors whispered. Others looked at Daniel with a strange mixture of envy and suspicion. The worst blow came when Emily returned from school, her cheeks wet with tears. "They said you're only with Miss Clara because she's rich," she cried, her small hands clenched into fists. Daniel's heart broke. He had survived grief, long nights, and poverty, but seeing his daughter mocked was too much. He made a choice. For Emily's sake, he would let Clara go. When Clara called, he ignored it. When she came to the garage, he stood firm. "I can't do this. I won't let Emily be a headline," he said, his voice heavy. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her words were steady. "Daniel, you don't understand. This isn't about status. It's about finding a home I never had." He shook his head. "You belong to a different world, Clara, and mine is too fragile to risk." She left in silence, but not defeat. The turning point came at Whitmore Industries' quarterly press conference, broadcast live across the country. Instead of launching into financial updates, Clara stepped up to the podium and did the unthinkable. "There's something the world doesn't know about me," she began, her voice echoing through the grand hall. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a chronic heart condition. Every day since, I've lived with the knowledge that time might be shorter than I hope. I've built companies and led empires, but in all my success, I never found what I wanted most, a family. She paused, her hands trembling as she gripped the podium. Until one night at a bus stop, when a man gave me his only coat without knowing who I was. That man is Daniel Carter, a single father who showed me more humanity in 5 minutes than I found in a lifetime of boardrooms. The room fell silent. Investors, journalists, viewers at home, everyone heard the tremor of truth in her confession. Clara pressed on. "If my time is limited, I want to spend it where love is real, where family is not a performance, but a promise. And I won't apologize for that." The speech went viral. Instead of scandal, the narrative shifted. People praised Daniel for his quiet dignity, for being a man who offered kindness without expecting anything. Customers flocked to the garage not out of curiosity, but to support him. Neighbors defended Emily at school. Slowly, Daniel realized Clara hadn't brought ruin, she had brought light. Still, he hesitated until one evening, Emily pressed a small bracelet into Clara's palm. The beads were mismatched, strung on elastic, the kind only a child could make. "It's a family bracelet," Emily said softly. "Daddy has one. I want you to have one too." Clara's breath hitched as she knelt to hug the girl, tears spilling freely. Daniel watched, his chest aching. In that moment, he understood Emily already saw Clara as family. His fear of loss had blinded him to what was right in front of him. That night, after walking Clara home, Daniel finally spoke what had been buried in him. "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice rough. "I already lost once. I didn't think I could survive it again." But maybe love isn't about guarantees. Maybe it's about choosing anyway. Clara reached for his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "If I have a year or 20, I want to spend it with you and Emily. No boardroom, no spotlight, just us." The weeks that followed were different. Clara balanced her CEO duties with evenings spent in Daniel's modest kitchen, laughing over burnt cookies, helping Emily with homework, wearing the coat he once gave her as though it were the finest garment in the world. Daniel learned that love didn't erase fear, but it gave him the courage to live fully despite it. On a spring morning, sunlight poured into the small dining room as the three of them shared breakfast. Clara wore Emily's bracelet, the beads bright against her wrist, and the old coat hung on the back of her chair. Emily giggled between bites of toast, and Daniel caught Clara's gaze across the table. It wasn't wealth or status that mattered. It was this, the warmth of belonging, the healing of broken hearts, the choice to love even when tomorrow was uncertain. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt whole. Sometimes it takes only a single act of kindness, a worn coat shared on a bitter night, to change the course of a life. Daniel's quiet compassion revealed that true strength is not in wealth or titles, but in the love we choose to give, even when we have little left. Clara, once defined by boardrooms and battles she faced alone, found healing in the warmth of a small home and the innocence of a child's bracelet. And Emily, who once longed for a mother's embrace, discovered that family can be built from courage, tenderness, and trust. Their story reminds us that love is not about certainty, it is about choosing each other despite the unknown. If this is your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories that celebrate second chances and the power of love.